The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Tulsa saloon, just as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Oklahoma horizon. And when the door opened, Benjamin Fraser looked up from the fence he was mending to see a woman step down into the dust, wearing a high-necked dress, despite the August heat of 1878. He would not have paid much attention except for the way she moved, careful and deliberate, like every step cost her something. Benjamin set down his hammer and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, watching as she retrieved a single carpet bag from the driver and pressed a coin into his palm. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat and climbed back onto his perch, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the street while dust devils swirled around her worn boots. Benjamin had been working on the property adjacent to the saloon for the better part of 3 weeks, repairing fences and corrals for Mrs. Hutchinson, who owned the boarding house. He was 26 years old and had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives and ranch jobs across Texas and Oklahoma Territory. He had seen plenty of people come and go from Tulsa, but something about this woman made him pause. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to hide the fine bones of her face. Even from a distance, Benjamin could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the way her shoulders curved inward as though she were trying to make herself smaller. She stood there for a long moment, looking up and down the street like she was not sure where to go, and then she started walking toward the boarding house with that same careful gait. Benjamin watched her approach, and as she drew nearer, something caught his eye. The collar of her dress was buttoned all the way to her chin, but the fabric had shifted slightly, revealing dark marks along the side of her throat. His hands stilled on the fence post. Those were not shadows. Those were bruises, purple and yellow and ugly, the kind that came from fingers pressed too hard into soft skin. She must have felt his gaze because she looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Hers were green, he noticed, the color of new grass after a spring rain, but they held a wariness that made his chest tighten. She quickly looked away and adjusted her collar, pulling it higher even though the heat must have been suffocating. Benjamin straightened slowly, his jaw tightening. He had grown up in Kansas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and his mother had taught him that a man who raised his hand to a woman was no man at all. The sight of those bruises sent a cold anger spreading through his veins, the kind that made his voice go quiet and his movements deliberate. The woman reached the boarding house steps and paused, looking up at the painted sign that read, "Hutchinson's Rooms and Meals." She seemed to gather herself, squaring her shoulders before climbing the steps and disappearing inside. Benjamin stood there for a long time after she had gone, staring at the door. Then he picked up his hammer and went back to work, but his mind was no longer on the fence. He drove nails with more force than necessary, each strike of the hammer punctuating the questions running through his head. Who had hurt her? Was it a husband, a father, someone who might come looking for her? He was still working when Mrs. Hutchinson came out onto the porch an hour later. She was a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that had earned her respect throughout Tulsa. She spotted Benjamin and walked over to the fence line. "Benjamin Fraser, you are going to split that post if you keep hitting it like that," she said, crossing her arms over her ample bosom. He paused mid-swing and looked up at her. "Sorry, madam. Mind was wandering. I noticed." She studied him with shrewd eyes. "You saw the new arrival, did you?" Benjamin set down the hammer. "Hard to miss. She's staying with you, for now. Paid for a week in advance, cash money, said her name is Victoria Langley and she is looking for work." Mrs. Hutchinson's expression softened slightly. "Poor thing looks like she has been through the mill." "She alone?" Benjamin asked, keeping his tone casual even though his hands had curled into fists at his sides. Says she is. Asked if there was a sheriff in town. Mrs. Hutchinson gave him a meaningful look. I told her Sheriff Morrison is a good man, fair and honest. Then she got real quiet and said maybe she would wait a few days before calling on him. Benjamin felt that cold anger tighten in his chest again. She running from something. It was not a question, and Mrs. Hutchinson did not treat it like one. She sighed and looked back toward the boarding house. That would be my guess. I have seen that look before, Benjamin. She is scared half to death but trying not to show it. Did you see her neck? I did. Mrs. Hutchinson's mouth pressed into a thin line. Which is why I gave her the room at the back, the one with a good lock on the door and a view of the street. And why I am telling you this, because I know you well enough to know you will not let it rest. She was right about that. Benjamin had never been good at turning a blind eye to trouble, especially when it involved someone who could not defend themselves. It had gotten him into his share of fights over the years, earned him a reputation as someone you did not cross, but it had also meant he could sleep at night knowing he had done what was right. What kind of work is she looking for? He asked. Anything honest. She can read and write, has a good hand for sums. I told her I would ask around, see if any of the shopkeepers need help. Mrs. Hutchinson paused. I also told her she could work for me in exchange for room and board, helping with the cooking and cleaning. She about near cried with relief. Benjamin nodded slowly. That is good of you. It is the decent thing to do. She gave him a long look. But I want you to understand something, Benjamin. That girl is fragile right now like a green horse that has been broken wrong. She needs kindness and patience, not some man charging in like a bull trying to fix everything. I am not going to bother her, Benjamin said, feeling slightly defensive. I know you will not bother her, but I also know that look in your eye. You want to find whoever did that to her and make them pay. That is your nature, and it is one of the things I admire about you. But what that girl needs most right now is to feel safe, and she is not going to feel safe if you go stirring up trouble. Benjamin picked up his hammer again, turning it over in his hands. So what do you want me to do? Keep an eye out. Make sure nobody comes around asking questions about a woman traveling alone. Help me make her feel like this is a place she can stay without looking over her shoulder every minute. Mrs. Hutchinson softened her tone. Can you do that? Yes, madam. She nodded, satisfied, and headed back toward the house. Benjamin watched her go, then looked down at the fence he had been repairing. It was solid work, the kind that would last for years if properly maintained. He thought about Victoria Langley up in that back room, probably still wearing that high-necked dress, probably still feeling the phantom pressure of fingers around her throat. He had told Mrs. Hutchinson he would not bother her, and he meant it. But that did not mean he was going to let anyone hurt her again. The sun was setting by the time Benjamin finished his work for the day. He cleaned up his tools and stored them in Mrs. Hutchinson's shed, then walked the 3 blocks to the small room he rented above the general store. Tulsa was not a large town, maybe 300 people on a good day, but it was growing. The railroad was coming through next year, and already new businesses were opening up to take advantage of the expected boom. Benjamin washed up and changed his shirt, then headed to the saloon for supper. The Prairie Rose was the only saloon in town, and it served decent food along with whiskey and beer. The owner, a former cavalry officer named Jack Monroe, ran a relatively clean establishment. There was gambling, but it was honest. There were women who worked upstairs, but they were treated with respect and fairly compensated. Benjamin had worked for Jack off and on over the past year, breaking horses and doing odd jobs, and he trusted the man. The saloon was moderately busy when Benjamin walked in. He nodded to a few familiar faces and took a seat at a table near the back. A waitress named Sadie came over and took his order, fried steak and potatoes, and brought him a beer while he waited. He was halfway through his meal when Sheriff Morrison walked in. Tom Morrison was in his early 40s, a solid man with a weathered face and steady gray eyes. He had been sheriff for 6 years and had a reputation for being fair but firm. He spotted Benjamin and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Help yourself." Benjamin gestured to the empty chair. Tom sat down and waved Sadie over for a coffee. When she had gone, he leaned back in his chair and studied Benjamin. "Heard you have been doing work for Mrs. Hutchinson, fixing fences, repairing some damage from the storm last month." "Why?" "No reason, just making conversation." Tom accepted his coffee from Sadie with a nod of thanks. "Also heard she took in a new boarder today, woman traveling alone." Benjamin took a drink of his beer, keeping his expression neutral. "That right?" "It is." Tom sipped his coffee. Stagecoach driver mentioned it when he stopped by the office. Said she looked nervous, kept checking behind her like she expected someone to follow her off the coach. Maybe someone was following her. That is what I am wondering. Tom set down his cup. Woman traveling alone, looking scared, arriving in a small town where she does not know anyone. Usually means she is running from something or someone. Benjamin met his gaze directly. If she is, then maybe she has good reason. Maybe she does. Or maybe she is running from the law. "You think that woman is a criminal?" Benjamin kept his voice dangerously quiet. Tom held up a hand. "I did not say that. I am just doing my job, Benjamin. When someone new arrives in town, especially someone who looks like they are running, I make it my business to find out why. That is how I keep this town safe. She is not a danger to anyone. You know that for a fact. You talked to her." "No, but I saw her." Benjamin set down his fork with careful precision, "and I saw the bruises on her throat." Tom's expression shifted. "You sure about that?" "I am sure. Someone put their hands on her, hard enough to leave marks. So if she is running, I would bet everything I own it is from whoever did that to her." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, I will take that into consideration. But if someone comes looking for her, claiming she is their wife or their property, I need to know the facts." "Property," Benjamin repeated, and there was an edge to his voice that made Tom look at him sharply. "That is the law, Benjamin. You know as well as I do that a husband has legal rights over his wife. I do not like it any more than you do, but that is how things are. Just because something is legal does not make it right. No, it does not." Tom finished his coffee and stood up. "But I still have to uphold the law. I will give her space, let her settle in. If nobody comes looking for her, then there is no problem. But if someone does show up with a marriage certificate or some other legal claim, my hands are tied." Benjamin watched him go, his appetite gone. He knew Tom was right about the law. A woman was considered her husband's property in most places, and if a man came looking for his wife, the law would side with him more often than not. It made him sick to think about, but it was the reality of 1878. He paid for his meal and walked back out into the warm evening. The streets were quieter now, most people having gone home for the night. Benjamin stood on the saloon porch and looked down toward Mrs. Hutchinson's boarding house. There was a light on in one of the back windows, and he wondered if Victoria Langley was up there, trying to rest in a strange bed in a strange town, still feeling fingers around her throat. The next morning dawned hot and clear. Benjamin arrived at Mrs. Hutchinson's place just after dawn to continue work on a chicken coop that needed rebuilding. He was measuring boards when the back door of the boarding house opened and Victoria Langley stepped out. She was wearing a different dress today, this one a faded blue calico, but it still had a high collar that covered her throat. She carried a basket and was clearly heading toward the well to draw water. She moved with that same careful deliberation he had noticed yesterday, and she kept her eyes down as though she did not want to be seen. Benjamin straightened and touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, madam," she startled, her head snapping up, and for a moment fear flashed across her face. Then she saw him, saw that he was keeping a respectful distance, and some of the tension eased from her shoulders. "Good morning," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, almost hoarse, and Benjamin wondered if that was from the bruising or just her natural way of speaking. "I am Benjamin Fraser. I am doing some repair work for Mrs. Hutchinson." "I see." She shifted the basket in her hands. "I am Victoria Langley. Pleased to meet you, Miss Langley." He deliberately used Miss rather than Mrs., and he saw her notice. Something in her expression flickered, but she did not correct him. "I should get this water," she said, gesturing toward the well. "Let me help you." Benjamin started forward, but she took a quick step back. "No, thank you, I can manage." He stopped immediately, holding up his hands. "All right, did not mean to startle you." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her assessing him, trying to determine if he was a threat. He kept his posture relaxed, his hands visible, his expression neutral. Finally, she gave a small nod and continued toward the well. Benjamin went back to his work, but he was aware of her the whole time. She drew 2 buckets of water, struggling slightly with the weight, and carried them back to the house. When she came out again a few minutes later, she had a basket of laundry. She began hanging sheets on the line strung between 2 posts in the yard. He worked in silence for a while, cutting boards and hammering them into place. The morning grew warmer, and he paused to wipe sweat from his face. When he looked up, he saw Victoria watching him. She quickly looked away, focusing intently on the sheet she was hanging. "Been working for Mrs. Hutchinson long?" she asked, not looking at him. "Off and on for about a year. She is good people. She seems very kind." Victoria pinned another sheet to the line. "She has been very generous to me. She is a good judge of character." Benjamin set down his hammer. "You planning to stay in Tulsa?" There was a long pause. "I hope to, if I can find steady work." "Mrs. Hutchinson mentioned you can read and write." "I can. I was a teacher before." She trailed off, and her hand went unconsciously to her throat. Benjamin felt that cold anger stir again. "Before you had to leave." She looked at him sharply, her eyes wide. For a moment he thought she might run, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. "Yes, before I had to leave. Whoever you left behind, if they come looking, there are people here who will stand with you. You do not know anything about me or my situation. I know someone hurt you. That is enough." Victoria stared at him, and he could see emotions warring in her face: fear, hope, suspicion, gratitude. Finally, she looked away. "You should not make promises you cannot keep." "I do not make promises I cannot keep." She finished hanging the laundry in silence, and Benjamin went back to his work. But something had shifted between them. Some small acknowledgement that they both understood what was not being said aloud. Over the next several days, Benjamin continued working on Mrs. Hutchinson's property, and he saw Victoria regularly. She helped with the cooking and cleaning, worked in the small vegetable garden behind the boarding house, and occasionally ran errands into town. She was quiet and kept to herself, but Benjamin noticed that she was starting to relax slightly. The rigid set of her shoulders eased. She walked a little less carefully. Once, he even heard her laugh at something Mrs. Hutchinson said, a sound like wind chimes that made him smile. He did not push for conversation, but when their paths crossed, he was always polite and respectful. He made sure to keep his distance, to never make sudden movements, to always let her see him coming. Gradually, Victoria began to acknowledge him more openly. She would say good morning without prompting. She would thank him when he carried something heavy for her. Once, when he was struggling to hold a board in place while hammering, she came over and held it steady without him asking. "Thank you," he said when he had secured the board. "You are welcome." She brushed sawdust from her hands. "It looks like good work." "I try. My father was a carpenter. He taught me that if something is worth doing, it is worth doing right. That is good advice." She paused, then added, "My father was a minister. He taught me that everyone deserves kindness and second chances." Smart man, he was. She looked away, and Benjamin saw grief shadow her face. "He passed 2 years ago. Fever took him. I am sorry. So am I." She took a breath and seemed to shake off the sadness. "I should get back to work. Mrs. Hutchinson is teaching me her recipe for apple pie." Benjamin watched her go, and he felt something shift in his chest. It was not just anger on her behalf anymore, though that was still there. It was something softer, something that made him want to see her smile, to hear that wind chime laugh again. He was in trouble, he realized. He was starting to care about Victoria Langley, and that was dangerous for both of them. 2 weeks after Victoria arrived in Tulsa, Benjamin was in the general store buying nails when he heard a commotion outside. He stepped out onto the boardwalk to see a well-dressed man on horseback talking to Sheriff Morrison. The man was in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore expensive clothes and rode an expensive horse, and there was an air of authority about him that immediately set Benjamin on edge. "I am looking for my wife," the man was saying, his voice carrying down the street. "She left Kansas City about 3 weeks ago. I have been tracking her across 3 states. Benjamin felt ice slide through his veins. "What makes you think she came to Tulsa?" Tom asked, his tone neutral. "I traced her to Oklahoma City, and the stagecoach records show she bought a ticket here." The man pulled a photograph from his pocket and showed it to Tom. "Her name is Victoria Langley. Have you seen her?" Tom studied the photograph for a long moment. Benjamin could not see his face, but he knew the sheriff was making a decision. Finally, Tom handed the photograph back. "What is your name, sir?" "Harold Langley, and I have legal proof that Victoria is my wife." He pulled out a folded document. "This is our marriage certificate dated 2 years ago. She is my legal property, and I have every right to take her home." Benjamin's hands curled into fists. Property. The word made him want to put his fist through the man's face. "Let me see that certificate," Tom said. He examined it carefully, then handed it back. "It appears to be in order. Then you have seen her. Where is she?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Before I answer that, I need to ask you some questions. Why did your wife leave?" "That is a private matter between husband and wife. Not if there was violence involved." Harold's expression hardened. "I discipline my wife as I see fit. That is my right as her husband. Discipline." Tom's voice went flat. "You mean you hit her?" "I mean I ensure she behaves appropriately. Now, are you going to tell me where she is, or do I need to search this town myself?" Benjamin stepped down from the boardwalk and walked toward them. Several other men had emerged from shops and businesses, drawn by the confrontation. Word traveled fast in a small town. "Sheriff," Benjamin said quietly, "can I have a word?" Tom looked at him, and there was something in his eyes that Benjamin could not quite read. "Not now, Benjamin." "I think now would be good." Harold looked Benjamin up and down dismissively. "Who are you? A friend?" "A friend." Harold smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My wife does not have friends here. She does not know anyone in this town. Now, Sheriff, I am losing patience. Tell me where she is, or I will file a formal complaint with the territorial marshal." Tom's jaw tightened. Benjamin could see the conflict on his face, the struggle between what the law required and what was right. Finally, he said, "She is staying at the boarding house on First Street. But I am warning you, Mr. Langley, if you cause a disturbance in this town, you will answer to me." I have no intention of causing a disturbance. I simply want to collect my wife and go home." Harold tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Sheriff." He turned his horse and rode toward the boarding house. Benjamin started to follow, but Tom caught his arm. "Do not do anything stupid. He is going to hurt her." Benjamin's voice was barely above a whisper, that dangerous, quiet tone that meant he was fighting to control his temper. "Maybe. Probably. But legally there is nothing I can do to stop him. She is his wife, Benjamin. The law is on his side." "Then the law is wrong." Benjamin pulled free of Tom's grip and started walking. "Benjamin," Tom called after him. "Do not make me arrest you." Benjamin did not respond. He lengthened his stride, his boots hitting the packed dirt street with purpose. Behind him, he heard footsteps as other men followed. Jack Monroe from the saloon, Will Henderson who ran the livery, even old Henry Davis from the barber shop. They might not be able to stop Harold legally, but they could bear witness. By the time Benjamin reached the boarding house, Harold had already dismounted and was climbing the steps. Mrs. Hutchinson stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression fierce. "You cannot come in here," she was saying. "This is a respectable establishment. I am here for my wife. Step aside, madam. I will do no such thing. Victoria is under my protection. Victoria is my property and I am taking her home." Harold tried to push past Mrs. Hutchinson, but she stood her ground. Benjamin took the steps 2 at a time. "The lady asked you to leave." Harold turned, his eyes narrowing when he saw Benjamin. "You, the friend, this is none of your concern. You are wrong about that. I have a legal right to my wife." The sheriff confirmed it. "I do not care what the law says. You are not taking her." Harold's hand went to his belt, where Benjamin could see he carried a pistol. "Are you threatening me?" Benjamin stood very still, his voice going even quieter. "I am telling you that if you try to hurt her again, you will have to go through me first." "And me," Mrs. Hutchinson said firmly. "And me," Jack Monroe added, moving to stand beside Benjamin. One by one, the other men stepped forward. Will Henderson, Henry Davis. Even Sheriff Morrison, who had followed the group, stepped up onto the porch. "Now, I may not be able to stop you legally," Tom said slowly, "but I can arrest you for disturbing the peace. I can make your life very difficult in this town. And I can make sure that every lawman between here and Kansas City knows about the bruises you left on your wife's throat." Harold looked around at the assembled men, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You are all fools. She is my wife. This is not over." "Yes, it is." The voice came from inside the house, and everyone turned. Victoria stood in the hallway, just behind Mrs. Hutchinson. She had changed her dress and now wore one with a normal collar, and the bruises on her throat were clearly visible. They had faded from purple to a sickly yellow-green, but they were unmistakable. 5 distinct marks where fingers had pressed into her skin. She stepped forward, and Benjamin saw that she was trembling, but her voice was steady. "I am not going back with you, Harold. You do not have a choice." "I do. I am making it." She lifted her chin. "You can take me back by force, but I will run again, and again, and every time I will tell people what you did. I will show them these bruises and the scars on my back where you hit me with your belt. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Harold's face went red. "You lying? I am not lying." Victoria's voice cracked, but she did not back down. "And you know it. You know every word I am saying is true." The silence that followed was heavy. Benjamin watched Harold, saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. Finally, Harold straightened his jacket. "Keep her, then. Let her shame herself and her family. When she comes crawling back, I will not take her." He looked directly at Victoria. "You will regret this. You have no money, no prospects, no respectable future. You will end up in poverty or worse." "Then that is my choice to make," Victoria said quietly. Harold stared at her for a long moment, and Benjamin saw something like genuine hurt flash across his face before it hardened back into anger. Then he turned and walked down the steps. He mounted his horse and rode out of town without looking back. No one moved until he was out of sight. Then Victoria's knees buckled and Benjamin was there, catching her before she fell. She was shaking violently, her hands clutching at his shirt. "I have got you," he said softly. "You are safe. He is gone. He will come back," she whispered. "He always comes back. Let him. We will be ready." Benjamin looked up at the assembled men, at their grim, determined faces, and knew he was not alone in this. "He will not touch you again, Mrs. Hutchinson ushered them all inside, and Victoria collapsed into a chair in the parlor. She was crying now, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Mrs. Hutchinson brought her tea and Benjamin knelt beside her chair, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I am sorry," Victoria said between sobs. "I am so sorry. I brought this to your town. You did not bring anything except yourself, and you are welcome here, Mrs. Hutchinson said firmly. "That man brought his own trouble. He is right, though. I have nothing. No money, no real prospects. I used everything I had just to get here." She looked up at Benjamin, her green eyes red and swollen. "What am I going to do?" "You are going to stay right here," Benjamin said, and his voice held that dangerous, quiet quality again, but this time it was a promise, not a threat. "You are going to let us help you, and you are going to build a new life, one where nobody puts their hands on you in anger." "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." Benjamin looked at her, at the bruises on her throat and the fear in her eyes and the courage it had taken for her to stand up to Harold Langley. He thought about how she had laughed like wind chimes, how she had helped him without being asked, how she had held herself together even when she was breaking apart inside. "Because everyone deserves kindness and second chances," he said, echoing what she had told him about her father. "And because I want to know you." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a softening of the wariness that had been there since the day she arrived. She reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched his hand. Just a brief press of her fingers against his, but it sent warmth through him like summer lightning. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the following weeks, Victoria began to truly settle into life in Tulsa. Mrs. Hutchinson refused to let her pay for her room anymore, insisting that her help around the house was payment enough. The women of the town, led by the minister's wife, Sarah Fletcher, made sure Victoria had new dresses to replace her worn ones. Will Henderson's wife, Emma, who ran a small school for the local children, offered Victoria a position as an assistant teacher. Benjamin continued working around the boarding house, but now he and Victoria began to spend more time together. At first it was just conversations while they worked, talking about small things. The weather, the progress on the fence, a funny story about one of the boarding house residents. Gradually, though, they began to share more. Victoria told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a minister who believed in education for everyone. She had trained as a teacher and loved her work. Then her father died, and she found herself alone with no family and few prospects. Harold Langley had seemed like an answer to her prayers. He was wealthy, established, and he paid attention to her when no one else did. "I should have known," she said one afternoon as they sat on the porch steps shelling peas. "There were signs even before the wedding. The way he spoke to servants, how he needed to control everything. But I was so desperate for security, for a place to belong, that I ignored them." "That does not make what he did your fault," Benjamin said firmly. "I know that now. But for a long time I believed him when he said I deserved it, that I brought it on myself by not being obedient enough." She paused in her work. "The night I left, he came home drunk and angry. I do not even know what set him off. He put his hands around my throat and squeezed until I could not breathe. I thought he was going to kill me." Benjamin's hands stilled on the peas. "How did you get away?" The housekeeper heard me struggling. "She came in and hit him with a fireplace poker. When he let go, she told me to run and not look back. She gave me what money she had and helped me get to the station." Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. "I do not even know her name. She was just there for 3 days, but she saved my life." "Then she is a hero," Benjamin said quietly. He wanted to reach for Victoria's hand but held back, not sure if it would be welcome. Victoria turned to look at him, studying his face. "You are different from other men I have known." "How so?" "You listen. You do not try to tell me what to do or how to feel, you just listen." She smiled slightly. "And you get very quiet when you are angry instead of loud. My mother always said that when a man starts yelling, it means he has run out of real arguments." Benjamin returned her smile. "She was a smart woman. Is she still in Kansas?" "No, she passed 5 years ago." "Consumption. My father followed her within the year. I think he just could not stand to be without her." Benjamin looked out at the street. "They were partners, you know, true partners. He valued her opinion on everything, made sure she had her own money, her own say in decisions." "That is what a marriage should be." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria said softly. It was. He finally gave in to impulse and reached over, gently covering her hand with his. "And someday, when you are ready, you will have that too. A real partnership with someone who treasures you." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked back up at him, there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Maybe someday." As summer turned to autumn, Benjamin and Victoria grew closer. He began walking her to the school each morning and meeting her afterward to walk her home. They took long walks around the outskirts of town, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride his horse, a gentle mare named Clover, holding the reins while she got comfortable in the saddle. She taught him to waltz one evening in Mrs. Hutchinson's parlor, laughing when he stepped on her toes. The bruises on her throat faded completely, leaving only faint shadows that disappeared within 2 months. The wariness in her eyes took longer to fade, but gradually Benjamin saw it replaced by something lighter. She smiled more easily. She laughed that wind chime laugh that never failed to make him smile in return. She began to relax into her life in Tulsa, making friends and building a community. But Benjamin noticed that she still tensed whenever a stranger came to town. She still checked over her shoulder when she walked alone. And sometimes, late at night when he walked past the boarding house after work, he could see her silhouette in the window, just standing and watching the street. It was late October when Benjamin finally told her how he felt. They had ridden out to a spot along the Arkansas River where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water ran clear and shallow. They sat on the bank watching the sunset, and Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, something she had started doing recently that never failed to make his heart race. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about the future." "What about it?" "About what I want it to look like." He took a breath. "About who I want in it." Victoria lifted her head and looked at him. "Benjamin, I know it is too soon. I know you are still healing from everything that happened, but I need you to know how I feel." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I am in love with you, Victoria. I think I have been since the day you arrived in town and you were so scared but so brave, standing up to the world all alone." Her eyes filled with tears. "Benjamin, I do not know if I can. I do not know if I will ever be ready to marry again, to trust someone that way. Then we will not marry. We will just be together however you need us to be." He squeezed her hands gently. "I am not asking you to be my wife right now. I am just asking you to let me be part of your life. To let me stand beside you and care about you and be there when you need someone. And if someday you are ready for more, I will be here. And if you are never ready, I will still be here. That is not fair to you. Let me decide what is fair to me." He reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "You are worth waiting for, Victoria Langley. You are worth everything." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the conflict in her face. Fear and hope, doubt and longing, all warring for dominance. Finally, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know. But I am also falling in love with you, and that scares me even more." Benjamin felt something burst open in his chest, something warm and bright and overwhelming. He cupped her face in his hands, careful and gentle, always gentle with her. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. In answer, Victoria closed the distance between them. Her lips were soft against his, tentative at first but growing more confident. Benjamin kept his hands on her face, letting her control the kiss, letting her set the pace. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I am still scared," she said. "That is all right. We will figure it out together," he smiled. "Besides, I am terrified." She laughed, surprised. You are the bravest person I know." "I am brave when it comes to facing down angry men and breaking wild horses. But this, loving someone, being responsible for their heart, that is the scariest thing I have ever done." Victoria took his hand and laced their fingers together. "Then we will be scared together." "That sounds about right." They sat by the river until the stars came out, talking and planning and dreaming. When they finally rode back to town, something had fundamentally shifted between them. They were no longer just two people drawn together by circumstance. They were partners, facing the world together. Winter came to Oklahoma, and with it, a new challenge. Benjamin's work around town slowed down as the weather turned cold and projects were postponed until spring. He had saved money over the summer, but not enough to last through the entire winter. He needed to find steady work, and there was not much available in a small town like Tulsa during the cold months. Will Henderson offered him a solution. His cousin owned a ranch about 20 miles west of town and needed men for the winter to help with the cattle. It was hard work in difficult conditions, but it paid well. Benjamin was reluctant to leave Victoria, but she encouraged him to go. "You need the work," she said practically. "And I will still be here when you get back. It will be 3 months, maybe 4. Then I will see you in the spring." She stood on tiptoe and kissed him. "Go, earn your money, I will be fine." So Benjamin went to work on the ranch, and those months were some of the hardest of his life. Not because of the work, though that was brutal. Not because of the weather, though Oklahoma winters could be harsh. But because he missed Victoria with an ache that never quite went away. He wrote to her every week, long letters that he sent back to Tulsa with the supply wagon. She wrote back, telling him about her students at the school, about life in the boarding house, about the Christmas festival the town had held where she helped serve hot cider and cookies. He read her letters over and over until they were worn soft at the folds. The foreman of the ranch, a gruff older man named Pete, noticed Benjamin's preoccupation. One night over a campfire, he asked about it. "Got a girl in town?" Pete asked, lighting his pipe. "I do. Must be some girl to have you mooning around like a lovesick calf." Benjamin smiled despite himself. "She is. She is smart and brave and kind. She has been through hell, but she did not let it break her." "Sounds like a keeper. You going to marry her if she will have me. She was married before and it went bad, real bad. She is still healing from it." Pete nodded slowly. "My wife was married before too. Her first husband used to hit her, knock her around when he was drunk. She left him and came west with her sister. I met her at a barn raising, and I knew right then she was the one." He puffed on his pipe. It took her 2 years to say yes when I proposed, but once she did, we had 40 good years together before she passed. 2 years. Yep, and I never regretted a day of waiting. Sometimes the best things take time. Pete looked at Benjamin. You just keep showing her that you are not like that other man. Keep being steady and reliable and kind. Eventually, she will believe it. Benjamin took that advice to heart. When he returned to Tulsa in late March, gaunt and weather-worn but with a good amount of money in his pocket, Victoria was waiting at the boarding house. The moment she saw him, she ran down the steps and threw herself into his arms, and Benjamin held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling like he had finally come home. "I missed you," she said against his chest. "I missed you too. Every single day." She pulled back to look at him. "You look terrible," he laughed. "Ranch work in winter will do that to a man. Come inside. Mrs. Hutchinson has been cooking all day because she knew you were coming back." Victoria took his hand and led him up the steps. "And I have something to tell you." Inside the warm kitchen, over a meal of roast chicken and potatoes, Victoria told him her news. The territory was establishing a proper school system, and they wanted trained teachers. Emma Henderson had recommended Victoria for a position at the new school they were building in Tulsa, with a real salary and a contract. "It means I will have steady income," Victoria said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Real money of my own. I will be able to support myself completely." "That is wonderful," Benjamin said, and he meant it. He knew how important independence was to her, how much she needed to know she could take care of herself. "There is more." She took a breath. "I wrote to a lawyer in Kansas City about Harold, about getting a divorce." Benjamin set down his fork. "What did he say?" "He said that Oklahoma Territory has more progressive laws than most places. If I can prove abandonment or cruelty, I have grounds for divorce. And with the bruises documented by the doctor here, and with witnesses to what happened when Harold came to town, he thinks I have a strong case." "That is wonderful news. It also means Harold will know where I am. The papers will have to be served to him." Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "He might come back." Benjamin covered her hand with his. "If he does, we will handle it together." She looked at him, and there was trust in her eyes now, real trust. "Together," she agreed. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Harold contested it at first, sending angry letters through his own lawyer, but eventually he gave up. Benjamin suspected that Harold's business associates in Kansas City had gotten wind of the situation and pressured him to settle quietly rather than face the public scandal. Whatever the reason, the divorce was finalized in September of 1879, 1 year after Victoria had arrived in Tulsa. The day the papers came through, Victoria stood in Mrs. Hutchinson's parlor holding the document and crying. But this time, they were tears of relief and joy. "I am free," she kept saying. "I am actually free." Benjamin had been there when the papers arrived, and now he pulled her into his arms. "You were always free. This just makes it official." She looked up at him, and there was a question in her eyes that made his heart race. "Benjamin Fraser, do you still want to marry me?" He pulled back slightly to look at her properly. "Is that what you want?" "Yes, God help me, yes. I want to marry you and build a life with you and not be afraid anymore." She laughed, a little breathless. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night. I want to have children with you and grow old with you and spend every day of the rest of my life with you." Benjamin felt like his heart might burst. He had imagined this moment 100 times during the long winter months at the ranch, but the reality was so much better. He dropped to one knee right there in the parlor, taking her hand. "Victoria Langley, you are the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I have ever known. You make me want to be a better man. You make me laugh and you challenge me and you understand me in a way no one else ever has." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring he had been carrying for months, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. Love and devotion and promise and hope. Mrs. Hutchinson, who had been tactfully absent until now, chose that moment to bustle into the room with a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. "Well, it is about damn time," she said, pouring generous measures. "I thought you two were going to dance around each other forever." They were married in November, just as the first cold snap hit Oklahoma. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town, with Reverend Fletcher officiating. The whole town turned out, it seemed. Mrs. Hutchinson stood as Victoria's witness, and Jack Monroe stood for Benjamin. Sheriff Morrison attended in his best suit, and even Pete from the ranch made the trip to town. Victoria wore a dress that the women of the town had made for her, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery. She carried wildflowers that had been preserved and dried. Benjamin wore his only suit, brushed and pressed, with a new shirt that Mrs. Hutchinson had insisted on buying for him. When Reverend Fletcher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Victoria's voice was clear and strong. "I do." And when Benjamin said the same words, he met her eyes and saw his whole future there. They moved into a small house that Benjamin had been fixing up in secret for the past 2 months. A little 2-room place on the outskirts of town with a garden plot and a barn for the horses he planned to start training. It was not much, but it was theirs. Their wedding night was gentle and slow. Benjamin had never been with a woman before, and Victoria's only experience had been pain and fear. Together, they figured it out, learning each other with patience and care. When Victoria cried afterward, Benjamin held her and asked if she was all right. "I am better than all right," she said. "I just never knew it could be like this, that it could be about love instead of power." "It will always be about love with us," Benjamin promised. "Always." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Benjamin took on more work around town as word spread about his skill with carpentry and horses. Victoria continued teaching at the school, and her students adored her. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and talk about their days, making plans for the future. In the spring of 1880, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, remembering how Harold had reacted to her pregnancies, how he had hit her in the stomach when he was angry, causing her to lose 2 babies before they were born. But Benjamin was overjoyed, gentle and protective without being controlling. "We are going to be parents," he said, his hand resting carefully on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you scared?" Victoria asked, terrified, but also excited. "We are going to be good at this, Victoria. We are going to give this baby all the love and safety and security we never had." The pregnancy was difficult. Victoria was sick for the first 3 months and exhausted for most of the rest. Benjamin did everything he could to help, taking over the cooking and cleaning, making sure she rested, holding her when she cried from frustration and fear. Dr. Matthews, the town physician, checked on her regularly and assured them both that everything was progressing normally. Their son was born in January of 1881, during a cold snap that left ice on the windows. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Benjamin feared he might lose Victoria. But she was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Benjamin wept. They named him James after Victoria's father. He had dark hair like both of them and eyes that Benjamin swore would turn green like his mother's. Victoria held him and cried, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming love. "We did it," she whispered. "We made something beautiful." "You did it," Benjamin corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are amazing." Being parents changed them in ways they had not expected. Benjamin discovered a patience he never knew he had, spending hours rocking James when he was fussy, singing off key lullabies that somehow worked. Victoria blossomed into motherhood, fierce and protective and infinitely tender. They took turns with the night feedings, both of them exhausted but happy. As James grew, so did their little family. Victoria went back to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Hutchinson happily watching James when needed. Benjamin started a horse training business that quickly gained a reputation across the territory. Money was sometimes tight, but they never went without. 2 years after James was born, they had a daughter. They named her Sarah, after the minister's wife who had been so kind to Victoria when she first arrived. Sarah had red hair that must have come from some distant ancestor and a temper to match. Where James was quiet and thoughtful, Sarah was bold and adventurous. Benjamin loved them both with a fierceness that sometimes surprised him. Life was not perfect. There were hard times, arguments, moments of frustration and worry. Victoria still had nightmares sometimes about Harold, and Benjamin would wake to find her sitting by the window, watching the street. But those moments became less frequent as the years passed, replaced by happiness and security and love. In 1885, Sheriff Morrison retired and moved to live with his daughter in Texas. The town needed a new sheriff, and to Benjamin's surprise, they asked him. He was reluctant at first, but Victoria encouraged him. "You are exactly what this town needs," she said. "Someone who understands that the law and justice are not always the same thing. Someone who will protect people instead of just enforcing rules." So Benjamin became sheriff, and he was good at it. He was fair but firm, and he had a reputation for giving second chances when they were deserved. He made it known that any man who raised his hand to a woman or child would find himself in a cell, legal rights or no legal rights. More than one abusive husband decided to move on to another town rather than face Sheriff Fraser. Victoria became the head teacher at the school, training new teachers and developing curriculum. She wrote articles about education that were published in territorial papers. She became known as an advocate for women's rights, speaking at gatherings and meetings about the need for legal reforms. She never told the full story of her first marriage publicly, but everyone knew that she spoke from experience. Their children grew. James became a lawyer, taking after his grandfather's sense of justice and his father's quiet determination. Sarah became a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in Oklahoma. They both married and had children of their own, and Benjamin and Victoria became grandparents. Through it all, they remained partners. They made decisions together, supported each other's dreams, weathered storms side by side. They still took walks in the evenings when the weather was nice, still sat on their porch and talked about everything and nothing. They still loved each other with a depth that sometimes took their breath away. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Victoria stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, which was now part of a much larger house that Benjamin had built over the years. She was 43 years old, with silver threads in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling. Benjamin came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is from what I thought it would be." She leaned back against him. "If someone had told me that day I arrived in Tulsa, scared and hurt and alone, that I would end up here, I never would have believed them." "I knew the moment I saw you," Benjamin said. I saw those bruises on your throat, and something inside me just knew that you were going to be important to me. That makes no sense. Love rarely does. He kissed her temple. But I have never been more grateful for anything in my life than I am for that stagecoach bringing you to Tulsa. Victoria turned in his arms to face him. I love you, Benjamin Fraser. I love you for seeing me when I was broken and not trying to fix me, for standing beside me instead of in front of me, for giving me space to heal and time to trust, for being the man I needed, even when I did not know what I needed. I love you too, he said simply. Now and always. They kissed, and it was like the first kiss and every kiss in between, familiar and new all at once. Years continued to pass. Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and Benjamin and Victoria attended the celebration in the new capital. They were in their 50s by then, their children grown and their grandchildren growing. Benjamin retired from being sheriff, passing the badge to a younger man he had trained. Victoria retired from teaching, though she still tutored students who needed extra help. They traveled some, taking a train to California to see the ocean. They visited James in Oklahoma City, where he had his law practice. They spent long stretches with Sarah and her family on their ranch in the northern part of the state. But they always came back to Tulsa, to the home they had built together. In 1920, when Victoria was 63 and Benjamin was 68, they sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The world had changed so much since that day in 1878 when Victoria had stepped off a stagecoach with bruises on her throat. Women could vote now. Automobiles were replacing horses. Tulsa was a city instead of a small town, but some things remained the same. Benjamin still reached for Victoria's hand without thinking. She still leaned her head against his shoulder. They still talked about everything and nothing. They still loved each other with a depth that had only grown over 40 years together. "You have any regrets?" Benjamin asked, a question they had asked each other many times over the years. "Not a single one," Victoria said, which was always her answer. "You." "Just that I did not find you sooner," Benjamin said, which was always his answer. She smiled. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to." "That is true." He squeezed her hand. "Want to know a secret? Always. If I had to do it all over again, knowing everything that would happen, all the hard times and challenges and struggles, I would do it exactly the same, because it led me to you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me." "I have been practicing." She laughed, and it still sounded like wind chimes after all these years. Then she kissed him, and they sat together on the porch as the sun set over Oklahoma, surrounded by family, wrapped in love, exactly where they belonged. Benjamin Fraser and Victoria Langley had started as two broken people finding their way in a hard world. But together, they had built something beautiful. A life filled with love and laughter, children and grandchildren, challenges overcome and dreams realized. They had proven that even the worst beginning could lead to the best ending, that healing was possible, that love could triumph over pain. And when Benjamin passed peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 73, Victoria held his hand and whispered that she would see him soon. She lived another 2 years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to finish writing her memoirs that would inspire generations of women. When she died in 1927, surrounded by family, her last words were about the cowboy who had seen her bruises and decided that she was worth protecting, worth loving, worth everything. They were buried side by side in the Tulsa cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Together Forever." Their children made sure fresh flowers were always placed on their graves, and their grandchildren told stories about the love their grandparents had shared. The story of the teacher who arrived in Tulsa running for her life, and the cowboy who helped her find a reason to stay, became part of the town's history, a reminder that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful lives. And in the house that Benjamin built, the house where they raised their children and welcomed their grandchildren, the house that still stood proud and strong over 100 years later, there was a sense of peace that never quite faded, as though the love that had filled those walls for so many years had soaked into the very foundations, leaving behind something permanent and precious and true. A testament to the power of love, the possibility of healing, and the courage it takes to trust again after betrayal. A reminder that happy endings are real, and that sometimes the best love stories start with the quiet determination of one person saying to another, "I will protect you. I will stand with you. I will love you, now and always."